Hello and welcome to this episode of World Anvil. Today we're looking at the Ethnicity Template. Now this template was added fairly recently, as of the time of making of this video anyway, and it's one of the most powerful templates that you have at your disposal as a creator. Now why do I say that? Well, let's have a look at the Ethnicity Template. It says here that it is not the species, but the people related by common cultural ancestry. What that means is that you generally, very seldom, will have an isolated cultural group that has no influence from outside groups whatsoever. And that's an important thing to bear in mind. If your fantasy world is so isolatory that no groups interact with one another, that's fine. But that erases a lot of history. History tells us that, if we look at Earth anyway, these empires have grown and risen and fallen and grown and risen and fallen, and in this cycle of constant growth and collapse and regrowth and collapse and regrowth and collapse, and each time there has been an influence that's left behind, and that has left its mark, its indelible mark. We still remember the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire collapsed 2,000 years ago, give or take a decade or two. And yet, Romanesque architecture is still all around us. We still use it in construction to this day. Concrete is still our favorite building material. So we've got these legacy things that stick behind with us. That's an ethnicity thing to a certain degree. The idea, though, is how do these cultures behave? Ave, the salute of the Romans. Has that permeated across? Has that carried across? Certain things have, certain things haven't. The language of the Romans is still used today. They call it a dead language because they say no one speaks it. Well, except for everybody who speaks it. So the idea here is that you have this prolonged exposure to a certain way of doing things, and that imprints on the local groups. However, the local groups will still maintain their own identities to a large degree. So if you look at, say, for example, Canadians and New Zealanders and South Africans, they were all once part of the British Empire. And to a large degree, 4 p.m. is still fairly important to most of them because that's tea time, and that's when you have to break for tea, no matter what you're doing. That's a legacy of the empire. That is an ethnic imprintation that those local cultures have now picked up. So it doesn't really matter where you're from. If you're in those countries, that's what's going to happen. In your world, in the creation that you are bringing to life, if you have this timeline that features an empire that has taken over a large amount of space and then over time been defeated and collapsed, what are the remnants that remain behind and that still influence local cultures? So that you might have an orc who is from a certain region, and they will greet one another with the same style that an elf from a similar region or from a nearby region will greet themselves as well. That's a legacy of an empire that they were all part of originally, but which they've broken away from or which is no longer in existence. Ethnicity Template gives us all of this. Family names, all those kinds of wonderful things. Ideals. What are the beauty ideals? Beauty ideals across the globe are very, very different, aren't they? You have different beauty ideals if you're in Africa, or if you're in South America, or if you're in Asia, if you're in America, you have a different beauty ideal, say, from Scotland, to be specific, for example. And those ideals have changed. We know that the 15th century, 16th century ideal is a very different type of ideal to, say, the 1920s, which is very different from the 1990s, which is different from now. You just have to look at the hairstyles to realize this. All of this is minutiae. It is small details which, if you add to your campaign, will give it a sense of epic history, of scale, so when people visit your world, they feel as if they're in a space that has been in existence for a long time, and they feel as if they're in a space that has been crafted to as fine a detail as is humanly possible to achieve. And you have it here. You've got customs, languages, common etiquette, dress, all this wonderful stuff. Do we make eye contact? Do we look down when we're talking to those that we don't know? Do we call those that we don't know sir or ma'am? Or do we use some other form of greeting? How do we do it? That's up to you to find out. Anyway, the template is there to make your world that much better. Make sure that you use it. Until next time, however, light up the forge.